The sound that filled my wolf hall those last weeks was not a sound I had known before. It was the sound of something ancient trying to hold on, slow, heavy breathing in the dark, the kind that comes when a great creature has already begun the long work of letting go. Vareth. 300 years he had walked beside the line of my fathers, and now he lay on the stone floor of the hall I had built for him, and no one in my kingdom could tell me why. I stood at the doorway most mornings before the council stirred. Not long. A king cannot be seen standing useless in a doorway, but long enough to hear that slow breathing and feel the weight of it settle across my shoulders like a second crown. He would lift his head when he heard my step. That was the cruelest part. Even now, even with whatever was draining the light from his silver coat and the warmth from his great flanks, Vareth lifted his head for me. His eyes found mine across the dark hall, and in them was the same steady fire they had always held. He knew me. He always knew me. I was the Alpha King of Ironfen Hold, the northern fortress that had stood in the mountain pass for 400 years. My name was Aldrich, and I had ruled for 11 years without a Luna beside me, which the council considered a wound in need of dressing. I considered it none of their business. I had the hold, the pack, the wolves of my line, and Vareth, the great moon wolf who had chosen my grandfather and passed to my father, and when I was 17 and still raw with grief at my father's death, had crossed the courtyard in the falling snow and pressed his enormous silver head into my hands. I had not deserved him then. I was not certain I deserved him now. But he was mine, and I was his, and the thought of the hall without that slow breathing in the dark was something I would not let myself approach. 3 months. That was how long the slow fading had gone on. It had begun in early winter, a stillness in him that was not rest, a dimness in the coat that no grooming could restore. My pack's senior healer, Ossian, had examined him on the 3rd day and declared it a bond sickness, a weakening that came when a great wolf's line had no heir to pass to, no next thread to reach for. He had spoken with such authority that the 3 younger healers behind him nodded as one, and I had felt something sharp and cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the mountain wind through the corridor. "What is the remedy?" I asked. Ossian had cleared his throat. "Rest, broth of silverroot, quiet." Vareth had rest and broth and quiet. He continued to fade. I called in a moon physician from the valley pack at Grimthorn 12 days later. She examined him for 3 hours, pressed her hands along his sides, burned 3 kinds of herb at the hall's stone threshold, and declared it an old magic in the blood, a dimming of the line bond that could not be reversed. She spoke with such confidence that I wondered briefly whether confidence itself had become a profession in my kingdom, whether anyone would walk through my gates and simply say plainly, "I do not know." I sent her home. The weeks after that were a procession. I do not use the word lightly. They came from every corner of the north, healers and moon scholars, and one ancient bone setter from the eastern ridge who insisted the wolf needed his spine aligned, which I refused on the grounds of dignity if nothing else. They came with remedies and chants and oils pressed from mountain flowers, and they arrived with the same settled certainty, and left with the same slightly smaller certainty. And Vareth lay on his stone floor and breathed his slow, heavy breath, and endured them all with the patience of something that had seen 3 centuries, and was not especially surprised to find the world still populated by fools. Ossian, meanwhile, had taken to greeting each new arrival at the gate with a particular expression, the expression of a man who found the parade of outsiders personally offensive, as if their presence implied that his own learning was insufficient, which of course it was, though I did not say this aloud. Ossian was proud and skilled in ordinary things and had served the hold for 14 years. I had no wish to humiliate him, but I was watching my wolf fade, and pride was a currency I could no longer afford to hoard. It was on a Tuesday in the deepest part of the winter, the sky the flat gray of old pewter, the courtyard stones rimed with frost that had not melted for 6 weeks, that the gate warden, a solid man named Breck, came to my study with an expression I had learned to read as, "There is someone at the gate who I believe you will not want to see." "There is a woman at the gate," he said. "She says she has some knowledge of moon wolves. She arrived on foot. She has no pack marking." I looked up from the map I had been pretending to study. Her name. She gave it as Saren. She is— Breck paused in the way of a man choosing diplomatic language. "She carries a pack on her back with dried herbs in it. She says she is a remedy woman. She has been traveling the northern settlements." "A village herbalist." "That would be my read, my lord." I sat back in my chair and looked at the frost on the window. A village herbalist. Ossian had already dismissed 2 hedge healers who had come in the 2nd month, and I had not argued because they had presented themselves with the same overconfident authority as everyone else, and their remedies had smelled of desperation dressed as expertise. A woman on foot with a pack of dried herbs. After 3 months of moon physicians and bond scholars, and a bone setter who had nearly lost his hand to Vareth's patience running out. "Send her away," I said. Breck nodded and left. I turned back to the map. I heard the slow breathing from the hall 2 corridors away. I had learned in 3 months to hear it through stone. I sat for approximately 4 minutes. Then I walked to the window, looked at the frost on the glass in the gray courtyard below, and said to no one, "I am a man who watches everything and changes nothing, and I am going to lose him." "Breck," I said, and my voice carried down the corridor before I had finished standing up. He reappeared in the doorway with the speed of a man who had not quite finished the errand. "Bring her in." His expression did not change, which was the mark of an excellent gate warden. "Yes, my lord." I did not go to the gate to meet her. I went instead to Vareth's hall and stood inside the doorway, just inside the shadow where the torchlight did not quite reach, and I waited. I wanted to see her arrive before she saw me. I wanted to see what she did when she crossed that threshold, whether she hesitated, whether she reached immediately for the wolf as the others had done in their eagerness to demonstrate their knowledge, whether her face closed down into the professional distance that I had come to recognize as the mask people wore when they did not know what to do but could not afford to admit it. Breck brought her to the doorway. She stopped there. She did not come in immediately. She stood at the threshold of the wolf hall and looked inside, and what passed across her face was not the hesitation of uncertainty and not the briskness of false confidence. It was something quieter than either of those. She looked at Vareth lying on the stone floor at the hall's far end, and the expression that came to her face was one I can only describe as recognition, not of the wolf specifically, but of the situation. An old creature in pain, a room that had been visited by too many hands that did not know what they were doing, a problem that had been talked at rather than listened to. She was not what I had pictured. Breck had said village herbalist, and I had pictured someone either very young and raw or very weathered and aggressively herbal smelling. She was neither. She looked to be somewhere in her late 20s, with the kind of face that belonged to a person who spent more time outdoors than indoors. A clean, honest face, the color of it brought up by mountain air and weather, her dark hair pinned back simply under a hood she had pushed down when she entered the corridor. Her coat was plain, well-worn wool, the kind that had been mended in at least 3 places I could see, and was none the worse for it. The pack on her back was indeed full of herbs. I could smell them from where I stood, a clean, complex smell that was nothing like the aggressive medicinal reek of the remedies I had endured for 3 months. This smelled like something that grew in a cold place and had not been overcrowded by processing. She did not see me. The hall was long, and I was in the shadow by the door she had just come through, and her attention was entirely on Vareth. After a moment she set her pack down very quietly beside the door. She did not open it. She did not remove anything from it. She simply set it down and then walked slowly along the length of the hall toward the wolf. I watched her pace. It was unhurried but not tentative. She moved the way a person moves when they have been doing a thing long enough to do it without performance, no announcement in it, no look-at-me deliberateness. She simply walked, and when she reached the place where Vareth lay, she did not reach out to touch him. She crouched down about 3 feet from his great silver head and she waited. I had not seen anyone do that. In 3 months, not one person who had come to this hall had simply waited. They had all reached. Every moon physician, every healer, every bond scholar had walked in with their hands already moving, already ready to demonstrate their expertise, already solving the problem before they had finished understanding it. She crouched in the cold air of the hall and waited, and after a moment she said something, very quietly, that I could not quite hear from the doorway. Vareth's ear moved. It was the left ear, the one that had barely twitched in 2 weeks. It rotated slowly, the way an ear moves when something has passed through the air nearby, and Vareth's head lifted, fractionally, from the stone. I had not moved. I was quite certain I had not moved. I pressed my back against the stone wall beside the door and I watched my wolf lift his head for a woman he had never seen, and something happened behind my breastbone that I did not immediately have a word for. It was not pain, though it had some of the shape of pain. It was not warmth, though it was warm. It was the feeling of something recognizing itself, the feeling of looking at a door you did not know was there, and finding that your hand already knows the key. She spoke again, still quietly. Vareth's head lifted further, and then, with the slow deliberateness of a creature who has spent 300 years deciding exactly when to move, he pressed his nose into her outstretched palm. He had not let any of them touch him. The moon physician from Grimthorn had reached for him, and he had turned his head away with a patience that was its own rebuke. The hedge healers Ossian had dismissed had not even gotten close. In 3 months, Vareth had permitted exactly 2 people to touch him, me, and one of the younger wolf keepers named Don, who had been tending the water bowl for 6 weeks, and had earned the proximity through sheer quiet consistency. Now he pressed his great silver nose into the palm of a woman who had been in the hall for less than 10 minutes, and I felt the warmth behind my breastbone spread to fill the entire cavity of my chest. I stood in the shadows and did not move. I would have stayed there all night if I could have. I was afraid to break whatever this was. She began to move her hands slowly, with the same unhurried quality she had walked with across the line of his neck and along his shoulder. She was not examining him the way the physicians had examined him, pressing and probing with diagnostic intent. She was listening with her hands, if that is a thing that can be said. Her eyes were half closed and her attention was entirely inward, feeling whatever it was that her hands were telling her. And Vareth, my Vareth, who had endured 3 months of hands that did not understand him, leaned into her touch with a sound I had not heard him make in weeks. It was not quite a sound. It was a vibration, deep in his chest, the kind that great wolves make when they are near someone they have already decided about. It was the moon wolf's version of a sigh. My eyes burned. I was not going to permit myself to stand in a dark doorway and weep, so instead I pressed my fingertips hard against the stone wall behind me and breathed through my nose and watched her work. She did not hurry. Time passed. I could not have told you how much. The torches along the walls burned steadily, and the frost outside the hall's high windows deepened, and the woman knelt on the cold stone floor of the hall and moved her hands over Vareth's silver coat with the patience of someone who understood that some things cannot be rushed, who had perhaps never learned to rush, who had come to a conclusion about patience that most people only theorize about and actually lived it. At some point she began to speak again, more steadily now, still quietly. I caught fragments, not words I recognized from any formal healing tradition, not the formal incantations of the moon physicians. They were simpler than that. A low, even murmur, the rhythm of it like water finding its level, and Vareth's great chest rose and fell in time with it. I understood something, standing there in the dark. The healers had been treating the symptom, the fading coat, the dimness in the bond light, the stillness in the limbs. They had been treating what they could see and measure. She was not treating anything. She was simply being present with him, entirely and without reserve, in the way that I had been present with him every morning in the doorway but had never permitted myself to bring into the hall because I had been afraid that my own helplessness would make things worse. She had no helplessness to manage. She was not frightened of this. She was not performing for anyone. She had walked in, set her pack down, and given the situation the one thing it had needed since the beginning, which was someone who could be completely in the room. The warmth in my chest had settled into something that had a different quality now. It was not the flutter of the initial recognition. It was the warmth of something that had been cold for a long time and was slowly, carefully, understanding that it no longer needed to be. A warmth that had the character of coming home to a room you had missed without knowing you were missing it. I had never felt it before. Not in 11 years of ruling alone, not in the years before that, not in any room with any person. I had felt respect and affection and the deep and specific loyalty of pack bonds. I had not felt this. This was a different category of warmth entirely, and I stood in the doorway of my wolf's hall in the dark, at 41 years of age, and discovered for the first time what the old Bond stories were actually describing. She found something. I know this because Vareth went very still, not the stillness of weakness but a different stillness entirely, the stillness of a creature who has heard something important. And then his great silver head turned, and he looked directly at me in the shadows of the doorway, with eyes that had the fire back in them, and held my gaze for a long moment. Then he looked at her, then back at me. I would have had to be considerably less intelligent than I was to misunderstand what he was doing. She became aware of me then. Perhaps she felt the change in the wolf, or perhaps she heard my breathing shift when Vareth looked at me. She turned, and in the uneven torchlight of the hall she looked straight across the distance between us, directly into the shadows where I had been standing for all this time like a man who had temporarily forgotten how to move. She did not startle. She did not apologize for having her hands on my wolf. She looked at me, and there was a steadiness in her face that I found, at that moment, the most compelling quality I had encountered in a very long time. "He has been carrying something," she said. Her voice was clear and even. It was not loud. "Not in his body, in the bond. There is something the bond has been reaching for that it has not found. It is not sickness exactly. It is a kind of waiting." I came out of the shadow. My footsteps on the stone floor were loud in the quiet of the hall, and I watched her face for the reaction that most people had when they realized they had been alone with the Alpha King for an undetermined amount of time without knowing it. Some went pale. Some went rigid. One of the hedge healers in the second month had dropped his entire kit of remedies on the floor and then bent to pick them up in a way that was worse than leaving them there. She did not do any of these things. She watched me walk toward her with the same steady attention she had given Vareth, which was either extraordinary composure or complete comfort with uncertainty, and I suspected it was the latter. "What is it waiting for?" I asked. "I do not know yet," she said. "I think it will tell me, given time." No one had said that to me in 3 months. I do not know yet. The simplicity of it moved through me like a bell struck in a quiet room. I crouched down across from her, across Vareth's great neck between us, and looked at my wolf. He had his eyes open and the fire was in them, and his breathing had changed. It was not the labored, slow breathing of the last weeks. It was still heavier than it once had been, but it had a different quality, a quality of ease, as if something had been set down that had been carried too long. "He let you touch him," I said. "Yes. He has not let anyone touch him in 2 months." She looked at Vareth, not at me. "He is very old. Old creatures are careful about who they let in. They have seen enough to know the difference between attention and presence." "What is the difference?" "Attention looks at something. Presence is in the room with it." She said this simply, without inflection, as though it were obvious, the kind of thing one said rather than explained. I found to my surprise that I understood it immediately. "How did you hear about him?" I asked. "A packman from Thornwater was in a settlement I passed through 7 days ago. He said the Alpha King's great wolf had been ill for months and no one could help him. He said it with the air of someone who finds the situation slightly shameful for the king and therefore mentioned it at low volume. A pause. I came because moon wolves are my particular knowledge, not a boast. Just the truth. Your particular knowledge, I said, not taught where exactly. She glanced at me then. I was not educated in any formal school of healing. I grew up near the gray woods at the edge of the eastern ridge, where there are 3 great wolves that have been old for as long as anyone can remember. I learned from watching them and from the woman who taught me, who had also learned from watching. It is not the same thing as what your healers know, but it is not nothing. Not nothing. The controlled understatement of it, so precise and so unfussy, hit me somewhere I had not expected. No, I said. It is clearly not nothing. Ossian found us there 20 minutes later, when he arrived for what he called his evening consultation, which was his way of ensuring that no one new had been admitted to the hall in his absence. He came through the door with the briskness of a man who has things to manage, stopped when he saw the woman kneeling at Vareth's side with her hands still moving, and then continued into the hall with an expression that managed to be both dismissive and personally offended. "My lord," he said, "I was not informed that someone new had been brought in." He did not look at her when he said this. He looked at me, in the way of someone who considers the woman in question too unimportant to address directly. "A gate oversight," I said mildly. "She arrived this afternoon." Ossian looked at her pack, which was still by the door. He looked at the dried herbs visible through its open top. Something in his face settled into the particular shape of a man whose worst suspicion has been confirmed. "A village herbalist," he said to me still. "My lord, we have been through this. The remedies that have been brought in by the hedge healers in the 2nd month did nothing but agitate him. She has no credentials of which I am aware, no training in the formal bond-healing arts, and frankly the situation is delicate enough that well-meaning interference from." "His breathing is different," I said. Ossian paused. He was a good enough healer to hear it once I had named it, and the pause told me he had heard it. The slow, labored quality was not what it had been when he had left 2 hours ago. He looked, for just a moment, at the wolf, and I saw him notice. And then the professional composure came back down over the moment like a curtain. "A passing variance," he said. "We have seen those before. My lord, I would ask that you allow me to conduct the evening assessment in the usual manner." "She will stay the night," I said. Ossian's composure held with effort. "My lord." "She will stay, and she will work with Vareth in whatever manner she sees fit, and you will not enter this hall while she is working unless she asks for you or I direct otherwise." I kept my voice level. I was not angry with Ossian. I was, if anything, grateful to him for being exactly the obstacle he was at exactly this moment, because it allowed me to be precise about what I wanted without needing to explain the warmth that was still settled in my chest, which was none of his business and would not have been improved by his analysis. "Is that understood?" He understood it. He left the hall with a dignity that cost him something, and I did not watch him go because I was watching Vareth's silver coat rise and fall with its new ease. "He will not be pleased," she said mildly. She had not looked up from Vareth. "No," I agreed. "He is accustomed to being the last word on the wolf. He is probably good at many things." "He is. He is less good at this particular thing, and he does not know it yet." She looked up at me then briefly, and there was the smallest possible curve at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile exactly, more like the acknowledgement of a smile. Then she looked back at Vareth. She worked through the evening and into the night. I sent someone to bring her food, which she ate without stopping, holding the bowl in one hand and keeping the other on Vareth's flank. I had a pallet brought into the hall and placed it near enough to the wolf that she could stay close without sleeping on stone, which I thought was both practical, and the minimum a person was owed for spending their night on the floor of a wolf hall, in a fortress, They had arrived at that afternoon with a pack on their back. I sat in the hall for most of it. I told myself I was there because Vareth was there, and Vareth was my wolf, and I had a right to be present. This was true. It was not the whole truth, but I was not in the habit of interrogating my own motivations too aggressively at 11 at night when I had a king's amount of things to do in the morning. She spoke to me sometimes, in the intervals between her quiet work. Not small talk. She did not seem to have small talk, which I found refreshing. She told me things about moon wolves that I had not known, some of which I suspected even the formal Bond scholars had not known, not because they were secret, but because they were the kind of knowledge that comes from watching rather than reading, and the two traditions had not always talked to each other. She told me that great wolves carry the memory of every bond they have held, not only in their minds but in their bodies, and that the older the wolf the more it can carry, and that sometimes the weight of all that memory can become its own kind of sickness if there is nothing new to reach for. She told me that the bond reaching she had felt in Vareth was not a symptom of decline but almost its opposite, the reaching of something that still had life in it, still had purpose, still knew that something was coming. "What is it reaching for?" I asked again, the same question I had asked hours ago. She was quiet for a moment. Vareth's great head was in her lap by then. She had been sitting against the wall with her legs stretched out, and he had moved his head there without announcement, the way he did everything, as though it were simply the obvious next thing, and she had not moved, just settled her hands into his silver coat. "I think it is reaching for the bond's next purpose," she said. "The bond passes down the line when a great wolf finds its next companion, but that is not all it reaches for. Sometimes it reaches," she stopped and started again. "There is an old word for it from the ridge women who taught me. The bond reaches for the one who completes the line's purpose, not just the next heir, the one who makes the whole thing make sense." I looked at her. She was looking at Vareth, and in the torchlight her face was still and intent and entirely without performance. The warmth in my chest was not a flutter now. It had become a certainty, the quiet, unargumentative certainty of a thing that has been true for some time and is only now being named. I had been Alpha King of Ironfen Hold for 11 years. I had ruled well, I thought. I had kept the northern pass safe, held the pack together through 2 difficult winters and 1 border dispute that had required 3 months of negotiation and considerable personal restraint on my part. I had done my work and done it without asking the universe for more than it owed me. I had been, in the language of my own private accounting, adequate, functional, a competent steward of what my father had left me. I had never, not once, felt that the whole thing made sense. "Saren," I said. She looked up at me. I did not know what I had been going to say next. It turned out I did not need to say anything next, because Vareth chose that moment to do the thing. He had been still, not the stillness of weakness, but the gathered stillness I had seen earlier, the stillness of a creature deciding. Now he lifted his head from her lap slowly, with the full power of something that had been resting and was now ready, and he turned it toward me, and the silver light of his coat blazed once, a pulse of it, a clean, cold light that filled the hall for a single moment and then was gone, and then he rose. He stood on all 4 legs with his full height, which was nearly to my shoulder. He stood and shook his coat with the brief, efficient shake of a wolf that has simply been lying down for a while and has now decided to get up, and the light in his eyes was the full light, the light I had not seen since early winter. I could not speak for a moment. He looked at me. Then he looked at her who had stood when he stood, who was watching him with her hands at her sides and her face bright with something that was not surprise. It had the character of recognition, of a thing arriving that she had been listening for. Then he stepped forward between us and he bowed. I had seen Vareth bow twice in my life. Once when my father died, and he had acknowledged the grief of the hold in the old way of great wolves, his massive head lowering to the ground while the pack stood in silence. Once when I had been made Alpha King, and he had come to the ceremony of his own accord, and bowed before the assembled pack in a way that had silenced the room more completely than anything I could have said. He bowed now, not to me. He turned his great silver head and he lowered it slowly to the level of her hands and held it there. The warmth in my chest was no longer a warmth. It was a fire, and it was the cleanest fire I had ever felt, nothing consuming in it, nothing frightening. Just light and heat, and the absolute, unambiguous knowledge of something that had always been true. She placed her hands on either side of his great head. Her hands were shaking, just slightly. That slight tremor of someone who has kept themselves steady through something extraordinary and has now, in the moment of the extraordinary thing arriving, permitted the steadiness to ease. "There," she said, softly to Vareth, as though she were answering a question. "There." I stepped forward. Not with a plan. I did not have a plan in this moment, which was not how I generally operated, but seemed to be the correct way to operate in a wolf hall at 3 in the morning, when your 300-year-old wolf had just bowed to a woman you had met 6 hours ago. I stepped forward and I stood beside her, and Vareth's great head moved between us in a way that was entirely deliberate, pressing once against my hand and once against her shoulder, and I felt in that touch the thing the Bond stories called the seal. The warmth in my chest, and whatever warmth she was carrying answered each other like two bells struck in the same key. She looked at me. Her hands were still in Vareth's coat. Her face was very close. We were both leaning toward the wolf, and in the torchlight her eyes were dark and steady and entirely present. "I do not know what that means," she said, quietly, honestly, with no apprehension in it. "I think I do," I said. She waited. The Bond stories say that a great wolf knows its line's purpose before the person does. That when the one arrives who will complete it, the wolf sees it before either of them has understood it. I looked at Vareth, whose eyes were bright and quiet and who was, in his way, extremely pleased with himself. I had wondered these last months. The reaching. I thought it was grief, a great wolf growing old, reaching for the heir who would carry him on and finding no one. I thought that was the sickness. I was wrong. She was very still. "He was reaching," I said, "but not for an heir. He was reaching for this moment, for you to come through that gate." I paused. 3 months ago in the old reckoning is when you would have begun your journey from the eastern ridge. Her breath was quiet and even. "I did not plan to come north," she said. "I was traveling the settlements because the winter was long and there were sick animals in 3 of them. And when I had seen to all of them, I found I was further north than I had meant to go. And then I heard about the wolf." "You heard about the wolf," I said. "Yes." "And you came." "Yes." She looked at Vareth. I nearly turned back. At the gate, when the warden turned me away, I told myself it was a sign that I was not needed, that the proper healers had it in hand. I stood in the snow for approximately 5 minutes arguing with myself about it. A pause. I find that I have a difficult time with turning back. The sound that came out of me then surprised me. It was the sound of someone laughing, not loudly, not the performed laugh of a king at court, but the real and quiet laugh of a person who has been given back something they did not know they had lost, and is grateful, and is a little undone by the gratitude. Vareth's ear twitched. "I am glad," I said, "that you have a difficult time with turning back." There was a long quiet. Vareth stood in the center of it like an enormous silver fact, radiating contentment. "I need to tell you something," I said, when the quiet had been long enough that I was certain I would say it clearly and not poorly. "I do not know you. I have known you for 6 hours, and most of those hours I spent watching you from a doorway. I am aware that what I am about to say will therefore sound sudden," she offered. "Sudden," I agreed. "All right," she said without alarm. "There is a warmth," I said, "behind the breastbone. I felt it when Vareth pressed his nose into your hand, and it has not gone since, and it is not simply the relief of watching him rise. I know what that relief would feel like, and this is not it. This is something else. And what Vareth just did," I looked at my wolf. "He does not do things carelessly. In 300 years he has bowed twice, and now 3 times. The Bond stories say the great wolf bows when destiny arrives in the room. She was looking at Vareth. I am not asking for anything, I said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are, or to do anything other than what you choose. You walked in here with a pack on your back and no credentials, and you gave my wolf the one thing 3 months of certified expertise could not give him. And I have exactly zero interest in making that complicated by adding obligation to it. I paused. I am only telling you what is true for me, what I felt, what Vareth seems to be rather aggressively endorsing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, with the full steady attention she had given everything else since she came through the gate. I do not know how to live in a fortress, she said. I have spent 11 years traveling. I am not good at council dinners, and I do not know the form for addressing the senior healer when I disagree with him, which, she glanced at me, I will disagree with him. Frequently, I imagine, I said. Yes, a pause. I have 3 remedies in my pack that are stronger than anything in his stores, and he will not want to hear it. I will look forward to that conversation, I said sincerely. Something in her face eased. Not softened, it had already been without hardness. It simply settled, the way something settles when it has been slightly uncertain of its reception, and has found the reception to be warmer than expected. I am also, she said, quite attached to that pack. I would like to keep it. You may keep it. And there are 2 settlements on the eastern ridge where I check in each spring. I would want to continue that. Of course. And I make a great deal of noise in the mornings. It is not intentional. I just wake up very quickly and I move around and I find things to do, and some people find it. I wake at dawn, I said. I stand in doorways listening to things. I find I have no objections to company in the morning. She looked at me. The torchlight had shifted. One of the torches down the hall had burned lower, and the light was warmer now, amber gold rather than the cold torch white of the deep night. In it her face was clear, and the steadiness of her was something I was already, I realized, completely dependent on finding there every time I looked. Vareth pushed his nose between us and sneezed, which broke the gravity of the moment in the most practical way possible. He has an opinion, she said. He always has an opinion, I said. He is simply usually more restrained about expressing it. She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh. It was not a complicated laugh or a performed one. It was quick and clear and genuine, the laugh of someone who did not overthink funny things, which is the best kind of laugh there is. Morning came the way mornings come in the deep winter of Ironfen. Gradually, a grayness preceding the light, the cold of the mountain pressing in under the doors while the hold slept. I had not slept, but it was not the sleeplessness of worry. I sat in the wolf hall with my back against the stone wall and Vareth leaning against my side and Saren asleep on the pallet 3 feet away, still in her coat, and I watched the gray light grow in the high windows and thought about the particular quality of a problem being solved in a completely unexpected direction. The hold had been cold for a long time. Not in temperature, we had stone and fire and thick walls, we had never been physically cold. But there is another kind of cold that you do not notice accumulating, that settles into a place over years of just enough, just functional, just competent. I had been ruling a hold that worked and a pack that was bonded and a wolf that was dying, and beneath all of it had been a coldness I had not named because naming it felt like weakness, and because I had not had a word for what was missing. I had a word now. At some point in the early morning she had shifted in her sleep, and her hand had come to rest near Vareth's shoulder, and Vareth had placed his great paw, with the gentleness of a very large creature being very deliberate about its size, close enough to her hand that she was warm. He looked at me with the satisfaction of someone who has orchestrated a complicated thing, and is now watching it pay off. I looked back at him with the expression of a person who is aware he is being managed by a 300-year-old wolf, and is not only accepting it but genuinely grateful for it. Ossian arrived at the hall entrance with 3 of his junior healers at what I assumed he considered a reasonable hour for morning consultation, which was earlier than was reasonable, but expressed his anxiety about the situation. He saw Vareth standing. He stood in the doorway for a moment with the expression of a man whose entire professional framework is being asked to accommodate a fact that should not exist. Then he came in, and to his credit, he came in the same way he always did, with the same briskness, and he examined Vareth with the same thoroughness, checking the coat and the eyes and the breathing, and at the end of this examination he stood back and said nothing for approximately 30 seconds. Then the breathing has normalized, he said. The coat has recovered its texture. He paused. The bond light in the eyes is restored. Yes, I said. He looked at her, who had woken when he came in and was sitting up on the pallet with the particular alertness of someone who falls asleep quickly and wakes the same way. She had her hands in her lap. She was watching him with an expression that was not hostile and not deferential. It was the expression of someone waiting to see what kind of person they are dealing with. You treated him, Ossian said. I sat with him, she said. What did you give him? Nothing. I will make something today if he will let me. Something from the graywood root and the northern moss that grows on the shadow side of the ridge stones. It will help his coat for the next weeks while his body remembers the bond warmth. She paused. But last night was not remedies. Ossian looked at her for a moment. I watched his face go through several things. Pride and the particular pain of a skilled person who has been shown the limit of their skill, and then something that was more complicated than either, a professional reckoning, the kind that a good person eventually does when they are confronted with evidence that their model of things was incomplete. It did not happen quickly, but it happened. I have been treating bond sickness in moon wolves for 14 years, he said, with the formal training of the Grimthorn School and the supplementary texts of the Northern physicians. A pause. I have not encountered this approach before. It is not new, she said without triumph, just as a correction. It is simply not written down anywhere the formal schools go looking. Would you, he stopped, started again. Would you be willing to explain the method? Not now, he added quickly. When it is appropriate, when he has had more time to rest. She looked at him steadily. Yes, she said, I would. Something in him unclenched slightly. Not much, but the particular tightness of a man defending territory softened, just fractionally, into the tightness of a man who is interested in something despite himself. I stepped forward. Ossian turned to me. She will be staying at Ironfen, I said, permanently. She will be given the chamber next to the wolf hall, access to the supply stores, and whatever she needs for her work. I looked at the junior healers behind him, who had various expressions ranging from confused to impressed, then back at Ossian. She is not beneath the healer council. She is not subject to it. She will work as she sees fit, and you will accord her the same respect you would give any colleague whose knowledge exceeds yours in its particular area. Ossian absorbed this. And what title, he said carefully, should I use? I looked across the hall at Saren, who was standing now, her pack over one shoulder, Vareth's great head leaning against her arm with the contentment of a creature who has successfully run a long project to completion. She was looking back at me with the steadiness I was already, as I had suspected last night, completely dependent on. Luna, I said, you will call her Luna. The junior healers did not move. Ossian was very still. The word had weight in Ironfen's stone hall. It had not been said there in 11 years, and the hold knew it, the way a hold knows things, through its walls and its fires and the pack that made up its life. Saren did not look alarmed. She looked, I thought, like someone who has been traveling for a long time and has arrived somewhere and is quietly assessing whether it is what she had hoped it would be, and is finding that it is, more or less, what she had hoped. Not perfectly. She did not know the form for addressing the senior healer, and she would disagree with him frequently, and she was attached to her pack and she made noise in the mornings. None of that was perfectly suited to the formal requirements of a Luna's role at a northern hold. All of it was, I thought, exactly what Ironfin needed. "I should like," she said from across the hall, "to go and check on the 2 wolf pups in the east courtyard before anything else. The smaller one has had a cough since yesterday morning, and it has been on my mind." Ossian looked at her. "The pups are under the junior healer's supervision." "I know," she said, not unkindly. "I heard one coughing when I came in yesterday. It has a particular pitch that suggests the upper chest, which responds better to a different treatment than the lower. I am not criticizing, I just want to check." She looked at me. "Is that all right?" "Go," I said. She went. Vareth, with the unhurried confidence of a creature that has just arranged everything to its satisfaction, and sees no further cause for delay, walked after her. I watched them go, the woman with the worn coat and the pack on her shoulder, and the great silver wolf who had been dying 3 months ago, walking side by side out of the hall into the cold light of a winter morning that was beginning slowly to look less gray. Ossian stood beside me. "She sat with him all night?" he asked. "Yes." A long pause. "The Greywood root compound she mentioned, I have read references to it. It is considered informal by the Grimthorn school, anecdotal." "She did not go to the Grimthorn school," I said. "She learned from women who watched great wolves for longer than the Grimthorn school has existed." Another pause. "She is very young." "She is not young," I said. "She is the right age, and she has been exactly where she needed to be to know what she knows." I looked at him. "Ossian, she gave back to Vareth in one night what 3 months of certified expertise could not give him. You are a good healer and I trust you, and I have trusted you for 14 years, and none of that changes, but you will treat her as what she is." He was quiet for a moment. Then, with a deliberateness that was, I thought, something to respect, "Yes, my lord." He left. I stood alone in the hall for a moment, in the quiet left by both of them. The torches were burning low, and the gray winter light was stronger in the windows now, and the hold was beginning to stir, footsteps in the upper corridors, the smell of the kitchen fires coming to life, the ordinary warm sounds of a large house waking up. I thought about what she had said to me in the night, about the bond reaching for the one who makes the whole thing make sense. I thought about 11 years of adequate. I thought about the cold that I had not named. I thought about a woman who had stood in the snow for 5 minutes arguing with herself about turning back and had eventually, in the way of someone for whom turning back is genuinely difficult, not turned back. I thought the hold has been waiting for this too, not only Vareth, the whole of it. The stone walls and the pack and the wolf hall and the king who stood in doorways at dawn listening. All of it waiting, the way the bond had been waiting, for the peace that would make the purpose of the thing clear. I went to the east courtyard. She was crouching in the frost beside the smaller of the 2 pups, a young wolf not yet 2 years old, gray-coated and scrappy, who had the characteristic bright-eyed stubbornness of a pup who had been born in the hard part of winter and had never quite forgiven the world for it. She had her hand on its chest and was listening, and the pup was allowing this with the tolerant expression of a creature that has decided she is acceptable. Vareth sat behind her in the courtyard like an enormous silver statue, watching. The pack keepers who oversaw the courtyard were standing slightly back, the way people stand when they are watching something they do not quite have a framework for yet but are fairly certain is fine. I came to stand near them and did not announce myself, and I watched her work. The junior healer assigned to the pups arrived a few minutes later, slightly out of breath, having apparently heard from someone that the new Luna was in the east courtyard. He was a young man, earnest and clearly competent in the way of someone still new enough to their training to be excited about it rather than defended by it. He stopped when he saw her and looked uncertain about whether to announce himself or wait. She looked up and saw him, "Come and look at this," she said without preamble. "Put your hand here." She guided his hand to the right side of the pup's chest. "You feel the difference?" He frowned, concentrating. Yes, it is more congested on that side." "Right, which is why the gray flower steam I would usually recommend for an upper chest cough won't work as well here. The drainage is not going to go where you need it. What you want instead is the northern moss compress, warm but not hot, on the right side for 20 minutes morning and evening." She looked at him. "Do you have northern moss in your stores?" "I am not certain," he said. He was no longer uncertain about anything except whether there was northern moss in the stores. "I do," she said. "I will bring some when I go in. Come and find me later and I will show you how to prepare it." She looked at the pup, who was still permitting her hand on its chest with the air of someone granting a significant concession. "He is going to be fine. He is just annoyed, which is probably a permanent condition for him." The pup sneezed on her hand. She laughed. The junior healer laughed. The pack keepers, who had been maintaining a cautious professionalism, allowed themselves the small warmth of smiling. And Vareth, from his position as enormous silver background element in the courtyard, watched all of it with the satisfaction of a wolf who has been planning this for a very long time and is finding the execution more or less acceptable. I stayed in the doorway of the courtyard in the cold morning light and watched the pack discover her. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way things happen at Ironfen, which is incrementally, stone by stone, the pack being constitutionally skeptical of sudden arrivals and constitutionally loyal once persuaded. But the junior healer went in and found the northern moss and came back, and she showed him the compressed technique with the patient clarity of someone who has taught many people many things in many cold places. And by midday 2 more of Ossian's junior healers had drifted to the east courtyard on invented pretexts and ended up staying to learn something. And Breck, who had sent her away at the gate the afternoon before, arrived to tell her that her traveling bags had been moved to the chamber next to the wolf hall, and stood there for a moment with the expression of a man who was not quite apologizing, but was sincerely hoping to be understood as someone who had been doing his job, correctly given what he knew at the time. And she thanked him for moving the bags so straightforwardly that he left looking considerably lighter than when he had arrived. I watched all of this through the day, mostly from a distance, in the way of a king who has things to do and does them, but is nonetheless aware of everything that is happening at the edges of what they are doing. I attended to the council, signed the winter supply agreements, reviewed the patrol reports from the pass, had the conversation with my steward about the spring road repairs, and did all of this efficiently because I had always been efficient, and because the efficiency was, today, underwritten by something that made it feel less like a maintenance task and more like the preparation of a place for someone to live in. She came to dinner in the great hall, still in her worn coat because she had not yet had the opportunity to arrange other clothes, and sat where Breck showed her, which was the seat to my right that had been empty for 11 years. Ossian sat at the foot of the council table with the expression of a man who has spent the day rearranging his understanding of a situation and is now at peace with approximately 70% of the rearrangement. The junior healers sat further down and kept looking over at her in the way of people who have learned something useful that afternoon and are still thinking about it. The pack at the lower tables watched her with the careful attention of people who do not yet know what to make of something, but are inclined to wait and see. Vareth lay near the hall's hearth, which he had not done in months. He was eating, actually eating, with appetite, the great moonwolf food of silverroot mash and dried venison that he had been refusing for 6 weeks. 2 of the hall's older wolves had settled near him, the way wolves settle near a member of the pack they have been worried about who has returned to himself. She leaned over to me during the first course and said, quietly, "The large wolf near the window is limping on its right back leg. It is an old injury, probably, but there is inflammation now. I noticed it this morning." "That is hail," I said. She has had that limp since a border incident 4 years ago. I can help with the inflammation. Not tonight, she does not know me yet, but soon. I will tell her keeper. A pause, then. This is a very large hall. It is. Do you eat in it every evening? Yes. She considered this. It would be warmer with a fire on the east side as well as the west. The stone on the east wall pulls the cold in from the mountain pass. I looked at the east wall. She was right, the cold came through it, and it had always come through it, and I had been compensating for it for 11 years with an extra layer rather than a second hearth. I will have one built, I said. She nodded and ate her food. That was the first dinner. There would be many more, with a second hearth on the east wall and 2 wolves near the fire, and the junior healers telling her about interesting cases they had encountered, and Ossian, by the 3rd week, bringing her a text from his stores that she had mentioned not having read, and the pack at the lower tables no longer watching her as a new thing, but simply watching her as Saren, who had the chamber next to the wolf hall and made noise in the mornings, and had cured Hale's inflammation in less than a fortnight, and had strong opinions about northern moss. The bond grew the way great things grow, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of ordinary ones, each one small and each one real. It grew in the mornings when I heard her moving in the chamber next door, and felt the warmth in my chest settle into an ease that I had not known was possible. It grew in the evenings when she came to Vareth's hall, and I came too, without always having a reason, and we sat on either side of the wolf and talked about things that mattered and things that did not, and Vareth lay between us radiating the satisfaction of a 300-year-old who has finished a project. It grew when she disagreed with Ossian over the treatment of a border fever outbreak in the South Settlement and was right, and he acknowledged it in the stiff but genuine way of a man who has decided to be better, and she thanked him for his acknowledgment with the same directness she gave everything. I asked her formally at the spring ceremony, the moon rite at which the pack assembled to acknowledge the bonds of the line. I asked her in the way that my father had told me it was done for great wolves, not a command, not an arrangement, not a transaction. A question, offered openly, in front of the pack and the wolves and the winter that was becoming spring, with nothing obligatory about the answer. She said yes, with the same steady attention she had given everything since she came through the gate on a Tuesday in the deep winter with a pack on her back, and 5 minutes of deliberation behind her. The pack was silent for a moment. Then the senior wolf keeper, an old woman named Murrah who had served the hold for 30 years and was not given to public displays of anything, said, quietly and clearly from her place among the assembly, "Good. Just that. Good." As if the situation had been incorrect for some time and was now correct and required no further commentary. I thought about that word for a long time afterward. Good as in right, as in the thing the hold had been short of named at last. The pack bonded to her in the way packs bond to someone who has earned it, slowly at first, and then all at once, the way a stone warms in sunlight. By midsummer she knew every wolf by name and ailment and history, and the wolves knew her, and on the occasions when she went out to the eastern ridge settlements in the spring as she had said she would, the hold felt it in the way you feel the absence of something that has become load-bearing without you noticing. She always came back with her pack restocked, and her knowledge of 3 new remedies she wanted to try, and a story about a great wolf she had visited on the ridge that I listened to in the wolf hall in the evening while Vareth listened also, with the attentive expression of one great wolf hearing about the affairs of another. The bond is not a thing I describe well. I am a king. I am better at administration than poetry. What I can say is that it is warm, and it is specific to her, to the particular quality of her steadiness and her directness and her attachment to her pack and her difficulty with turning back and the laugh that comes quickly and the way she moves in the mornings. It is not a general warmth. It is a warmth that has her exact shape. And Vareth, who had been fading into a waiting that no healer could understand, who had been carrying the memory of 3 centuries of bond and reaching for the thing that would make the whole line's purpose clear. Vareth is, 3 years later, as silver and as bright-eyed as the day I first saw him cross my father's courtyard and choose me. He runs the high ridge in the good weather and returns to the wolf hall at night, and he lies near the east hearth that we built in the great hall, and he leans against her knee in the evenings with the contentment of a creature who has done the thing he set out to do. I think about Breck sometimes, sending her away. I think about the 5 minutes she spent in the snow deciding whether to turn back. I think about how the difference between the hold I was keeping and the hold I have now is, in its simplest form, 5 minutes in the snow and a gate warden who had done his job correctly given what he knew. Destiny is not a grand thing in my experience. It does not arrive with ceremony. It arrives on a Tuesday in deep winter, on foot, with a pack full of dried herbs and a knowledge of moon wolves that no formal school had bothered to write down, and it stands in a doorway and does not rush, and it waits for an old wolf to make up his mind. I am glad, every morning when I hear her moving in the next room, that she is bad at turning back.